Thank you very much for having me here with you today. I think I have one slide that's going to come up here, I believe. There we go. And really, I am going to follow on from the comments that you've heard from my colleagues, Rob Califf and Marie. And I really just want to hit on some of my observations, both from my time at FDA, my time as a investigator in clinical trials, especially with the focus on people with complex illness in the older age settings, as well as in palliative care. And then also think about this from what I'm observing right now in COVID. And the first thing I wanted to point out is a recurring theme around leveraging policy options. As you've heard, it is really important to drive forward the innovation that we want to see in science for the older adult and drug discovery in this space by making sure that there is money and investment and that there are enabling policies. People respond to investment in a carrots and sticks fashion. A couple of the policies that have been pointed to somewhat in today's and yesterday's sessions and also sort of throughout time are both the orphan drugs designation, where there's special status that provides tax credits for research and development, and being able to use that kind of exclusivity for drug development. I'm not saying that that is what to use for special scenarios for the older adults, but to recognize that there are those kinds of settings that actually help to promote the development of drugs in this space. We also mentioned that of pediatric development. One of the things that I've noticed since coming to FDA is that oftentimes when these special scenarios like orphan and pediatric provisions are mentioned, you get that but it's complex, there's competition issues and pricing issues, and I think that's all true, but practically speaking, these kinds of pathways do create enabling forces, and I think it's worth looking at those types of pathways and figuring out what we can learn. Similarly, what we're learning as it relates to, for example, real-world evidence, and I'll come back to that, and how can we take advantage of the capabilities in the real-world evidence space is another enabling type of policy option to continue to push forward. And then also something mentioned yesterday is partnering, for example, enabling actions at FDA with, for example, what's at CMS through activities like coverage with evidence development. I know we've got a question as to where coverage with evidence development is going to be going in the next 1 to several years, but certainly looking at these types of policies are going to be important to push forward. Second is what I think about is terms of the importance of not only enabling policy, but implementation and familiarity. And this has come up in different ways throughout the sessions, but let me tell you about some of the things that I've observed since I've been at FDA. You can imagine that if you're a reviewer at FDA, especially if you're a new reviewer as a part of a division looking at new applications, the responsibility to keep people safe when you approve a new drug is paramount, and actually also very important and can be somewhat scary. And so even if you might hear at the highest level statements from FDA and across government that it's important to ultimately see, for example, more science with the older adult, we actually have to get the familiarity all the way to the medical reviewers who are seeing those new applications that incorporate new drug design, that incorporate real-world data, that incorporate understanding the role of, for example, remote monitoring in clinical trials. And that familiarity is as important as saying it's important. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that I absolutely believe that the NIH is very important in this, and that is a critical starting point for investment, but we also need the life sciences industry involved. This is about making sure that we've got the new drugs of the future, and the life sciences industry is going to be very important for that. We can both learn from them as well as teach the life sciences industry what's possible. Therefore, demonstration projects, listening sessions, both inside the agency and outside the agency, and learning from the realities of COVID-19 are going to be very important. One of the things that Rob brought up that was also on my list was this issue around complexity. there's something about the older individual, multi-morbidity, polypharmacy, caregivers, that makes this somewhat overwhelming to think about tackling. And we actually need to be really clear that this is an important space and acknowledge the complexity and then start working our way through it. And that really, I think, as you heard from Rob, needs to be a critical area of focus. And then finally, I'd like to mention, as it relates to this space, is the importance of being able to put it together and learn from the totality of the evidence. We've heard from a number of sessions around new clinical trial designs that serve up understanding across the older age population. We've heard about adaptive trial designs, et cetera. I think it's going to be really important that we take advantage of these new trial designs, including pragmatic and platform trials, and we partner that with real-world evidence. Importantly, it may be about figuring out initial information around safety and effectiveness in small populations, and then widening our understanding through real-world data post-approval or in the phase 3 setting. And I think that it's going to be really important to continue to think about using data from multiple sources, including the electronic health record and also sensors and other technologies, as a key way of widening our understanding for the older patient. What we've learned in COVID-19 is that it's critical to learn from all of these data streams, electronic health records, social media, sensors, to try and start to tell the full picture of the patient. And then certainly in the situation of the older patient, we need to learn from patient-reported outcomes as well as caregiver outcomes to understand how people are faring. We've heard a lot about implementation science and patient-centered outcomes research, and we need to be learning a bit from that science and then incorporating that earlier into drug and development when that's appropriate. So pragmatic trials, PROs, patient involvement. But one of the things I heard that I thought was quite interesting was around this criticality of endurance, recognizing the way that we currently design our clinical trials is tough. And we actually need to think about how do we make sure that the design of clinical trials are designed for the people that we want in our clinical trials, and that we understand what that means. But if we're going to start to modify clinical trials, we need to understand the impact on the integrity of the data. Finally, the issue of technology. We've heard a lot about different technology. I can't say I disagree with anything that I've heard. The only thing I'd like to add is that we need to partner with tech developers to make sure that they're building the solutions that we think are needed to involve older people in clinical trials. If we don't say, here's what we think is needed, that won't happen, especially when we're talking about software and data. And the last thing I would like to point out is that really for all of drug development, but certainly when we talk about the older individual who's also experienced lots of complexities in life potentially, we need to make sure we incorporate humanity and personhood. One of the other things that I want to say is that we actually have to have compassion for all and recognize that this is hard and that we're going to have to all work in order to make it better.